Fraud is a very important topic that's linked to cybersecurity, and every enterprise really has to deal with it these days. So, most businesses have an anti-fraud program to reduce the amount of unexpected financial losses due to fraud. But most of these programs focus on fraud against the organization, including fraud by employees or other insiders. So, what about the fraud that occurs against employees as individuals or against the organization's customers? Even if a crime isn't directly targeted at the organization, are there compelling reasons why management should include it in its anti fraud program? Well, today on the 45th session of the Live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, we'll explore what that kind of fraud looks like and what organizations should be doing about it. So welcome to all. If this is your first time, the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum is a group for anyone who's passionate about security awareness and human risk management. And it's brought to you by ClickArmor, the fully interactive security training program that's designed to really prepare employees and individuals for facing real or simulated attacks. I'm Scott Wright, and I'm the CEO and Chief Engagement Officer at ClickArmor. Before I introduce our amazing panel. I would like everybody to type in where you're coming from around the world so we can get a picture of the international presence we have and also give you a little practice on typing in the chat so you're not too shy to chime in when we need you to. So as usual, I'm joined by, I'm missing a panelist. Let me just see if we can get Michaela on. In the meantime, I will introduce the others and hopefully she can join us. I think there she is. So Michaela Leovog is founder of Cybility Consulting, a provider of cybersecurity advisory services and engaging learning experiences. She works with leaders to embed cybersecurity into their organizations using the Cybersecurity Conductors Companion and the hacker approach to playful learning that sticks. She's also a STEM ambassador, mentor, and lifelong learner. It's really great to have you here with us, Michaela.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So it's Michaela's first time, so welcome her. And also another first timer is Ross Betzler, who has 2 decades of experience in the financial sector, specializing in information security, cybercrime prevention, and business resiliency. Ross has a passion for cybersecurity awareness and helping to protect employees, customers, and the local community against cyber threats. So that's going to be really important in this discussion, I think. Thanks very much, Ross, again, for joining us the first time.
Thank you.
And we have Fleetus Poston, one of our regular panelists, as a seasoned IT and security professional, currently a security operations manager. Beyond his expertise, he finds immense joy in sharing his passion for cybersecurity with others, as well as the occasional dad joke and OSINT exploitation for fun. And I'm Scott Wright, CEO and founder of ClickArmor. I help businesses build a cyber-confident security culture through innovative and interactive training methods. So I am going to move to a section. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to ask people in the chat where they came from today. So we've got people from North Carolina, from Ottawa, Toronto, Thornton, Colorado, Turkey, Brampton, New Mexico, Houston, and the UK. Awesome. And more coming in. Excellent. Thanks very much, folks, for sharing where you're coming in from. You might also be interested in what we do with these sessions. So we actually record the full session and we'll have it out within a few days on our YouTube channel, as well as in our awareness forum that I'll tell you about in a second. And we also turn the insights from these sessions into a quarterly report we call the CISO report on security awareness. And that's something that you can download for free, no strings attached. So feel free to share these things. You can join our forum where we post these videos as well. So please engage with the content and share it. Most of all, we'd like to stay up to date on any news. We'd like you to stay up to date on any news. If you join the forum, we try and keep people up to date on stuff that is happening. So now I'm just going to jump into our session. I usually do a little bit of a context, and this is just my perspective on things, and happy to have anybody chime in. But to set the context here, the fraud against employees and customers is a little bit different than the typical fraud that organizations are trying to reduce the losses, the financial losses of their own organization that may come from employees or insiders or cyber attacks as well. But a lot of times, fraud against employees and customers as individuals doesn't really appear on the corporate network. There's no messaging that actually comes in via email or touches their networks. So it's something that's very hard for the organizations to actually handle. And when it is uh, executed against employees or even other people connected to the organization, like shareholders, board members, it can cause financial losses and personal stress, and it then would affect their availability and even performance on the job if it is severe enough. The other way to look at it is against customers. It's of course going to cause customers financial losses and may damage their reputation, but it could also damage our own organization's reputation, even if the attack, as I said, never touches the network. So that's one thing that I wanted to share. The other is just a little bit of research. What we found in preparing for this. Proofpoint's 2024 State of the Fish report has some interesting stats in it. One of them is that Microsoft was the most abused brand in 2023 when it came to impersonation of the brand and then using that to commit fraud or other kinds of cyber attacks. So a lot of malicious messages used in that kind of manner. There's also an interesting infographic about brand phishing and the most impersonated brands there. So those are things that might be of interest to you. But at this point, I'm actually going to start by doing one of our polls. What we like to do is a few polls throughout the session, and we'll enable panelists to vote as well. But we really would just want to start asking a few questions to get the sense of what people in the audience are thinking, their views. So in our first poll, aside from fraud against the organization, which of these do you feel the organization should provide? Guidance for employees, guidance for customers, or actions other than against other forms of fraud, which I couldn't think of at the time. But in the quiz or in the poll, you'll be able to answer with a long answer, whatever you like, if you had some other items there. So I'm going to let that poll run for a little while, and then we'll turn it over to the panel and just sort of open it up. If anybody in the panel has a comment they'd like to make, first of all, just put up your hand in Zoom and we'll get to you. And if nobody puts up their hands, I'm going to start calling on people. So we'll keep it fun and informal. But what are the biggest risks to the employees and to customers from fraud? So anybody like to start on that? Looks like Fleetus has his hand up.
Sure, this is something that so first off, I'm going to come at this a little bit from the security operations and then from the awareness or human risk point of view. But as you already alluded, most comms now are coming through your text messages, you're getting emails, and they're finding out who you are based on your LinkedIn profile or your social media platform. So it's easy to target you and say, hey, I'm from this company or I'm representing your company. So hey, we've changed your benefits. We're sending it to your personal email because you may not be there. So the biggest thing is just educating, as we've talked in previous calls, of how to take this from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. How do you stop and assess? How do you understand, is this from my company? Am I used to getting this type of communication via text, via email? Have they ever reached out to me from this platform or this medium? And just educating them on how to stop and assess. So like at home, I think I've used this analogy before, is how do you know when to open your front door? How do you know when to not touch the stove? Is it because of formal training or is it because of the school of hard knocks? Have you been burned by touching the stove? Have you been robbed by opening the door when you weren't supposed to? It's training the individuals to be able to stop and assess and use the training that they've learned either formally from their parents or just from life in general.
Yeah, excellent points. So anybody else on the panel wanted to comment on, the typical risks that we're seeing that are facing the employees and customers?
I can.
Yeah, Ross.
I'll touch on the customer side because we deal with the same employee risks that everybody else does, but being a financial institution, the customer fraud loss is becoming really large. And one of the biggest risks that we're seeing is normal customers do not understand because they don't have the same formal training that most people who work in an organization have. So they have no phishing training. They don't understand that SMS text messages can be spoofed, or what crypto wallets are, payments that work across crypto networks. So the largest risk we see from the customer and our community stand is just them not being able to consume awareness and education in a manner that makes sense to them, because we got a lot of blue collar workers who might not have formal training on social aware or security awareness and stuff at their company, so they really don't understand that side. And then we see a lot of people losing large sums of money because of that, just not understanding the basis of what fraud is.
Yeah, good point. Michaela.
Hopefully I'm off mute there. In addition to what the others have said, I'd also pick up on the area of volunteers, because they're neither employee nor customer. And it is an area where, I've worked with charities in the UK as well. And the way that volunteers can be used both as a threat within themselves, the insider threat, because people need the support. So yes, please come volunteers, work with us. But that is actually a threat to the organization potentially as well. But also, the volunteers themselves, they tend to, want to do the right thing, kind people. And so they're also susceptible to people who are perhaps posing as or impersonating charities and things like that. So that's another side of the fraud risk there.
Awesome. Fleet, any last thoughts on the
Yeah,
impacts?
I'd like to tag onto that because again, some of you may have seen these or not, maybe not understand, but the quick, hey, I need your help. You can make money from home events that are used to wash money. It's mule campaigns that you see, hey, if you just give me this little information, or if you just take this survey, if you just able to work X amount of hours, I'll guarantee you this money. And more or less what they're doing is they may pay you, but they're using you to wash the money. They're using you to move the money around to clean it so that it can come into the States or leave the States. So you have to be careful about where you sign up for remote jobs, because we all work remote now, or a lot of us are looking for remote opportunities. So it's quick for your family members. Hey, I can make an extra $1,000 a week if I just sign up for this. You may get paid $1,000 that week, but you may be funneling and helping move money around that you may not think about. And that's hard because everyone wants, in the financial times we have, I know I can speak for the US, I can't speak out external. People are tight with inflation and other charges. So understanding how to combat those and educate on how to make sure that you're applying for the right job, not just through LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a good point. And while we're just talking on that, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela in a second. But that very topic of jobs is something we actually covered in the Shared Security podcast that I'm a co-host on a week or two ago. And it was a story that there's a new sort of wave of recruiting scams that are actually targeting people for work from home jobs, right? And so there's a whole lot of, I guess, demand for jobs when people are now being forced back into the workplace or hybrid, models, and they'd much rather work from home all the time now. And so the attackers are targeting them with that kind of scam as well. Michaela, did you have another comment?
No, I just forgot to put my
Okay.
hand down. I'm assuming this thing in my head will come up later, so I'll save it for now.
That's fine. That's fine. Absolutely. All good. So now I just have to find my sharing button again and see if I can get back to our guide slides. So here we are. So we're going to do another poll. Second poll is, what are the most damaging types of fraud attacks? Similar to the last question, but hopefully people have a little bit more detail and might have some insights into the types of things. In each of these polls, I'm doing it a little bit differently than I've done it before, where I used to just ask a multiple choice type question. I'm adding a second question, which is really the other aspect of the first question. So if you said other, then you can type something in the second space, and then I'm not sure what it will look like when we come back to it afterwards, but we'll see. So that's our next poll question. Something I think is useful for organizations, and if you're here kind of hoping to get some tips, this is just a infographic that I found online, and I thought I had put a QR code there to go find it, but sorry, I didn't. I'll put it in the video when we edit this, and hopefully we'll help people. But this is just a few very simple tips, and as Ross said, some people don't really understand the basics of what they can do to protect themselves. So hoping that that might be helpful for some of the attendees here today. So the second question open to the panel is, what are the corporate controls or policies that should be in place to address fraud against employees and customers? I'm not sure if it would be the same controls or policies for both, or if there are different approaches to these things. So Fleetus, do you want to start this one?
So I'm going to start with your employees just because I think that's the easiest for most of us to understand. It's during your trainings, during your onboarding, during other opportunities, share early on. This is how we share information with you. We will use your corporate email for your HR benefits. We will use your personal email for your 401k so that you can take it with you, or whatever your company is doing. Share how you're going to communicate. We will send you text messages or this type of alert, a text, an email for these type of interactions. You go ahead and indoctrinate and share how you're going to share information to your employees, and then share a way to report them. Like, what is the chain of command? Do you go to your help desk? Do you go to your manager? Do you go to an ethics line? And sharing all those comms, like what is the mediums that I can ask questions at, and then being responsive, making sure that you do respond if someone does report something so that it's a timely manner so they can make a decision. And then on the customer side, having resources on your website that also shares the same thing. This is how we're going to engage with you. Here's our formal number. Call this number. If you hear from us outside of this number, do not call. We see those all the time with recent breaches. Contact the number that's on the back of your credit card. Call Marriott directly or Hilton directly. Don't use the number that you're getting from the notification, because breach notifications we get numb to. It happens daily now, so it's easy for someone to spoof that and try to get additional information out of you that can be used fraudulently.
Yeah, excellent point. A couple of things I can mention here. And on your first tip about organizations should describe to employees how they're going to communicate, that's an amazing point. In fact, I have a good example of this, and I've shared my experience before where I got phished in a phishing simulation by a customer when I was doing consulting. And if they had done an orientation session or provided some guidance up front to say, here's how we will invite you to or communicate you for your training, etc., as opposed to just, I'm onboarded, I got an account, and the next thing I know, I get an email saying I've got training scheduled, and I click on it, and I got phished. So that was just something that popped into my head when you were talking about that. It certainly could have helped to have some orientation type communication briefing. And then absolutely on the website and have prominent displays of where you can report anything that looks suspicious, and having timely responses to those reports is great. So Ross, would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would echo what was said before, especially on the internal side. Just reiterate the points, get in front of people often and early on. If you can do it during your new employee orientation, on some sort of regular cadence is always good. I know for us, we do a ton of different things between monthly newsletters, quarterly forums, be on the lookout for BOLO type of announcements, the regular cadence training. All of those items, I think that's good. And then reinforcing how to escalate issues and report issues whenever they're found, setting up some sort of abuse mailbox, like those types of items. Because one of the things that we've seen is if newer employees don't know where to escalate things to, we can't address and remediate threats quickly if we don't know about them. So definitely on the employee side, that's the two big things: is in front of people often and how to escalate issues. And then on the customer side, this is something that we've always done the standard, put out information on our website, send out email notifications, those types of things. And now we're trying to do additional awareness, short videos that we can do that are generic for our customers about items that are going on, in relation to BSA and AML types of items and those types of things. So that's meeting our customers where they're at is kind of the big thing there too, is having processes and procedures in place to be able to meet your customers in wherever they consume knowledge the best.
Awesome. Michaela, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are a couple. So in terms of the employee side, I think one of the really key policies that organizations need is a whistleblowing policy. I don't know if you call it that in the US actually, it's like sort of freedom to speak up, and sort of, just flagging something that can also be done anonymously if needed. Because I think there's lots of examples where people don't feel safe to speak up about something they notice. So that for me is a really key policy. And then the other thought I had was around for the customers. Actually, I've got one more for employees. On the customer side, we really need to have those messages at the point of interaction where that fraud potentially could take place. So, for example, lots of the banks have started, when you add a payee, doing the verification and sort of saying, are you sure about this? And giving you those reminders, like, from your infographic, but actually at the point at which you are potentially going to make that step. So I think that's a really key thing. And the third thing that just made me think about was, you mentioned phishing earlier, and it strikes me that we do phishing sims, we do pen testing, but we don't actually do kind of fraud sims to actually then test if people spot something and report it much in the same way. So that was just a thought that sprang to mind when you were speaking.
Yeah, and we can talk about that maybe later this week. You and I might be talking, so I'd love to follow up on that.
Yeah, I'll
Excellent.
add to that a little bit. I mean, we talk about business email compromise. I think that's the closest thing from a fraud point of view that's in our phishing sims is, can we get you to enter data? Can we get you to potentially send an ACH, so a payment transfer, without you following internal policy? So I think that's where this says right here, what policies do you have in place is making sure it's a 2 or 3 person job to make that change. I know that's difficult in some organizations, but the CFO should have to have the CEO also to approve a certain dollar amount, not just the CFO. Or you should have a controller, or you can have a third person who's the third key, third click, third approval, to make sure that there's not collusion. That's the other piece of having the third person, because fraud also includes collusion. And you can do that very easily by skimming off the top, by stealing and selling merchandise, leaking your intellectual property. It's not completely related to this, but with the new generative AI, you could purposely shoot data into an open source just to fraudulently leak data about an R&D project. And that's not really fraud that we're talking about today, but that's a way of being an insider.
Excellent. Apologies, folks. I kind of missed checking our chat because there are probably some good discussion points here. There's points. Well, Michaela's been making a lot of points, so hopefully she'll be chatting about those too. But Ahmed says accountability should be enforced as well. The due diligence aspect of it, yeah, for sure. I think if we can actually have somebody accountable in the organization for monitoring and even surveying, the customer base or the employee base about what kinds of attacks they might have seen. It's a little bit historic, doesn't help the people who may have gone through it already, but if we can do a bit of trend analysis on that, we can hopefully start to stem the flow or the trend of things that are happening against people. Because if somebody is impersonating the organization, whether it's a bank or otherwise, that can go on for a long time if people aren't made aware of it. So that's something that I think the business needs to be monitoring. All right. Next poll question I'm going to launch is, if fraud attacks on employees and customers impersonate the organization, but those messages don't touch the corporate network, how should the organization try to address these risks? And we may have already talked about some of these things, but we'll let people enter in the polls if they have any specific items they think are most important, or if they have any sort of free form or other suggestions. So we'll let that one run for a bit. And then our last question for the panel is, who should be responsible for addressing fraud risks facing employees and customers as individuals, and how should they incorporate the mandate into that strategy? So this is a sort of a very philosophical question. I mean, it might obviously sound like it should be the CFO, because the CFO is typically responsible for fraud. But if we're talking about fraud not against the organization but against the people, then maybe it belongs somewhere else. Does anybody have any thoughts about the responsibility within an organization?
I'll go first again if you want. I mean,
Yeah,
I said
sure.
everyone in the org because I think we're all supposed to be the hands, feet, and eyes and ears of our organization. So if you see something, you say something again. We all pretty much may or may not follow brands. So the company we work for or other brands that we're loyal to. So we see their social media posts, so be comfortable reporting people pretending to be someone they're not. Or if you are an employee, if someone makes a comment that's nefarious or misleading to your brand, did you understand how to communicate? So back to your poll question is making sure that the organization has a ethics line or a submission portal or an email address that you can forward screenshots to, that they have the ability, and your employees should be comfortable to, what we talked about earlier, to blow the whistle and say, this doesn't look right. I feel like something is going wrong in the organization. Can we investigate? And you can either do it anonymously or you can do it formally. And you got to be able to do both, knowing that autonomy isn't always there. And sometimes it can't be protected in fraud because someone has to come out eventually, but protecting that person or persons for as long as possible with anonymity is best practice.
Yeah. Ross, do you have any thoughts about, how your organization or others like yours would best try to address this? Who actually would be responsible for this kind of activity and controls?
Yeah, the accountability side gets to be a little bit more difficult in some ways with the customer stand. If you have several 100,000 customers, and you're talking about accountability on trying to train all of those customers in a way that they retain that knowledge, that can be relatively difficult. But I definitely think having policies and procedures in place to make sure that businesses do have, abuse mailboxes for customers to send in information, ways on their website to be able to teach people how to send in that information, or areas to report fraudulent, telephone messages, SMS text messages are really in financial institutions in the US and I believe worldwide right now. So giving customers and non-customers a way to report those messages, I think that that's key. The big thing is just being able to report items quickly enough so you can do things about it. Even in wire fraud, in the US, there's a thing called the fraud kill chain. And so as long as you know about fraud fast enough, you can start to reverse some of those transactions. But if you don't know about things within, say 48 hours, it's hard for banks to actually do stuff about that. So I think that's also, educating customers on saying something quickly, whether that's, like a whistleblowers type of thing, or how you do your internal reporting. But really just that communication and giving people a way to communicate what's happening will allow people to address it.
Yeah, excellent. Good points. Michaela, do you have any thoughts?
Um, Lots of thoughts. Let's see if I can make them coherent for everyone else. So, I think I mentioned earlier about thinking about how we can do things slightly differently, and I think the whistleblowing and everything is great, but that's about dealing with a particular incident, perhaps, rather than anything systemic. And as human beings, we respond to stories and how things make us feel. And I do wonder if there's perhaps a case to say that organizations could be more transparent about some of the stories that they themselves are involved in, like whether they've helped foil, a particular fraud for a customer, because I think those sorts of stories being shared with people are going to perhaps make them more likely to be mindful themselves in the future. And we talk about private sector needing to be responsible for their customers, government for the public, etc. But again, as individuals, we need to take responsibility ourselves, whatever role we may have at that time. And I do think maybe that's the way we could move forward with that.
Yeah, I like that. I also think the marketing department, typically is responsible for communication with the public and often is responsible for monitoring social media, mentions of the brand. And so if people are starting to see brand impersonation attacks against themselves, you often see them posting on social media saying, I got this, fake thing that, was impersonating Microsoft or DHL or whoever. And as soon as the marketing team sees that, I think there should be some process in place that relays that back to senior executives. And maybe it is the brand section of the marketing department that actually has to care about that, because it does certainly impact reputation if it starts to happen more and more. But again, customer service, making sure that when people call in with customer complaints that, they paid this thing and they thought it was the real organization, but it really wasn't. That's a customer service issue. So a lot of that, I think, actually starts to fall into the marketing area. And I think it's possible that marketing maybe should be having at least joint or maybe full responsibility for the external and maybe even employees. Maybe for employees, it may be HR. But similar, it shouldn't necessarily all be on the CFO like the internal fraud typically is. Fleetus?
So on that, the new exposure management terminology and verbiage I start to think about is where security comes back into play. Again, I'm coming from my security operations side of the house. I need to see when new domains are spun up that look like mine. I need to pay attention to flagging and alerting when posts are made about my company. So I monitor what's shared on X and other places and get alerts. And then my team is able to investigate those alerts to see if it's just, as you said, a disgruntled customer or a disgruntled prospect, or if it's an actual adversary who's trying to do something. So account takeovers or domain takeovers are easy to do or easier to do in today's society because there are domain registers who will sell you a domain with no ethics behind it real quickly. And that's why you got to be able to look for typo squatting and other stuff to help. So I think it is a shared responsibility between the security org and marketing to attack that, as well as your technical support or your support organization when they get those phone calls or Zendesk tickets or email alerts. That there's a process, like we keep talking about a process and a procedure to follow when they come in to escalate, because the support staff will send me stuff today that looks suspicious, like someone will share a link or a document, and it allows us to figure out if it's fraudulent or not, if they're just trying to compromise our systems because they don't want to pay for our services anymore, or they want to disrupt our services.
Excellent points. Anybody else have any thoughts on this before we go on to look at the poll results? All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Actually, just give me 1 second. I'm going to make sure I've got all these queued up. And something I just discovered as I was looking at this is that the extra fields that I asked people to fill in with responses to polls, if I share those, it actually shows people's email addresses, which I'm not going to do. So we use some good OPSEC here today. But I appreciate people putting in their extra thoughts on the polls. So I'm going to share just the poll data. If you guys can see this, I think this is the number one. Yeah, number one. Aside from fraud against the organization, which of these do you feel an organization should provide? And so it was guidance for employees, 90% said yes. Guidance for customers, 60% said yes. And other types of things, 50%. So I can't scroll down to see what people put because it will expose people's email addresses. But there were a few extra comments in this. Any thoughts on this particular response rate? I think there's a higher response on the employees. Obviously, I think it makes sense to focus on employees. It is hard, as Ross said, to provide explicit help to customers, but I think there are things that could be done, and for organizations that are high enough profile and can afford it, they should be doing those things. But there are other things that we'll try and post maybe in our follow-up in the community anonymously what the responses were to those things. Second question was, what are the most damaging types of fraud? So this is interesting. Romance scams look like the highest rating ones. 6 out of 12 people said romance scams, followed by gift card and ransomware, and then non-ransomware types of extortion. So by the non-ransomware extortion, it's where you get a message saying, we've got, some bad things happening about you, and we want, in order to prevent that from being exposed, you must pay us. And whether or not that impersonates the organization or affects the organization on a customer side, maybe not, but it certainly could in fact impact individual employees. And if anybody has thoughts on that, feel free to jump in. Yeah, Michaela said sextortion is very prevalent in the UK news. So we know of it here, but I don't know that it's a huge thing at the moment, but maybe I'm not reading the right papers. So Shelley says the marketing externally, this goes back to our marketing discussion. Look what we found and we shut it down. Story is great. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking that success stories around, things that show the organization is watching for these things and being proactive. Great point, Shelley. On the third question, we had if fraud attacks on employees don't touch the network, how should the organization try to address them? So the highest rating was bulletins to employees and customers via email or other media, followed by interactive educational content with invitations in the outreach, and followed by regular social media posts, both internal and external, and recurring PR campaigns. So those are really interesting responses there. So anybody have any thoughts on any of those poll questions and the results that we saw? Michaela?
Yeah, so the one that interests me on this question is the recurring PR campaigns, because I think that responsibility, certainly in the UK, is something that I think should really sit with government from a sort of public service education perspective. I think when you have, as Vita was saying earlier, there's people who don't work in the corporate environments, who don't get the training that others perhaps see as normal. I know insurance companies are going some way to doing that, but again, it's not reaching everybody. Whereas I think, from a government point of view, they do have a duty in terms of public safety. And when you think about some of the things that can happen as a result of fraud, I think it's justifiable to say that those PR campaigns are something that should sit there. That's my personal view.
Excellent. Fleetus or Ross?
I'll add a little bit and then let Ross go. I think the biggest thing here as I think about this is the campaigns need to be cohesive and you need to be branded correctly, because we see so much information come across in front of us all day long that it's going to get mute. We're going to get numb if it's not labeled correctly, if you start changing the way you write them. So with generative AI, you start letting your AI write your prompts, or you're writing your language and it doesn't convey to your audience, you may lose them and the point will be lost. So we got to be comfortable with our writing styles. Don't get too far away from your bread and butter. Don't try to get fancy. This is, at least in the US, the reading levels of most of your customers is probably middle school to high school. So you got to be careful with the vernacular that you use to communicate as well, and try to stay away from technical terms. I mean, I'm notorious for this. I love my alphabet soup, but I have to be able to take my alphabet soup and convey it in a manner that is concise and easy to digest for the middle schooler, the high schooler, the grandmother, the working mom, the dad, the stay-at-home parent who may not touch this stuff other than to interact with their financials. They're doing their online bill pay, or they're buying stuff online for e-commerce. So just being consistent would be my thing, and paying attention to the languages and the vernacular you're using when you communicate.
Yeah, great points. I think it also means that, you've got to work with your comms teams, right? Because they're the ones that sort of understand the level of understanding, or they should, to the people they're communicating with. They should have professionals who can do that. Any last thoughts, Ross?
Just reiterating what was said before, I think the PR side, that outreach to the community is one of the biggest things. But like what was mentioned before is who takes responsibility for that? Is it business's responsibility to educate the general public, or is it the government's responsibility, or who takes that responsibility? And I think that's a difficult thing that we haven't figured out yet, as who should educate people.
Yeah.
And then working in a bank, we see all forms of fraud, but a lot of the things that we see is like if somebody overpays you on Venmo and it's a random overpayment, and then you take that money out, and then that payment transfer was initiated under a stolen debit card, all of a sudden that money's out of your Venmo account and it's going to be taken from your linked bank account. That
Yeah.
type of awareness is not something that anybody's really talking about, and the general public doesn't really understand whenever they sign up for any sort of
Yeah.
app. It's not Venmo specific, and so I think that PR campaign is a difficult thing to try to get the awareness out there and educate consumers on that.
Right. Great points. Okay.
One thing on that too, we mentioned Venmo, but PayPal's still around and still heavily used by companies in the fake/real PayPal request, where it's a valid charge that's sent to you. The only thing that's wrong on there is the phone number in which you call them. Everything else on that email, it's a legitimate charge. They'll send you a $250 payment, and some people will just pay it. And the only reason that it's non-legitimate is the contact information inside of PayPal is to contact the adversary. The email one, if you call, you're calling the adversary versus calling PayPal. But if you go to paypal.com, which we tell people to do, you'll see the charge sitting in your PayPal account. It's a valid PayPal request that someone is using fraudulent means of
Yeah.
your antivirus has expired, or you
Yeah.
need to renew this subscription, this support contract. So that's another way fraud is happening. They get lucky. People just pay it. And they didn't
Yeah,
steal it from you. They just stole money.
I've actually seen the same thing coming from QuickBooks invoices, right? A legitimate QuickBooks invoice, but for something, from somebody that was actually doing it for fraudulent purposes. So we're getting close to the end. I don't want to go over time for people, but we usually just like to sit back and reflect for a few minutes on some of the things that we've covered today, that are really sort of insightful, both for executives. Think about what did we discuss today that could be really useful for a CISO or a CFO in their planning, or even a chief marketing officer. I think the responsibility and accountability for that external communication is probably one of the bigger ones that we just discussed. How do we get the CFO working with the HR director or the CMO around communicating in those senses? For the implementers, the security awareness managers, I think you also have to work with marketing and think about some of these things in a different perspective, right? And make sure you've got the right level of communication, understanding that you're reaching out to people. We saw some interesting feedback there that said, some of the more popular suggestions in our poll was to include interactive content, and that'll be something that I'd love to follow up on with people if they want to discuss that. And then finally, insights for individuals. We had that little infographic tip. I'm not sure how much it would be helpful, but just to give you an idea of the kind of things that we would like to see happen. So with that, we'll just start moving towards our ending state. And I just wanted to say that ClickArmor does support these sessions, so really glad everybody can make it, and we hope we give good value. Just want to convey to you that, if you are doing external outreach, we'd actually love to work with you, because there's a lot of in ClickArmor that can be sort of different from your typical security awareness training platform. We could actually do outreach to people outside the organization in a number of different ways. We can help create tailored content for that purpose. A lot of the things that we talked about today are really exciting to us. So if anybody does want to chat about that, would be happy to have you reach out to Ryan or myself. Also wanted to let you know on the 17th, next Monday, we're going to be starting our 5-day Cyber Night Challenge. We basically do this once in a while where we invite anybody who wants to try the platform. It's basically a 3-minute a day sort of competition, and we do it for 5 days, and it's fun, and we'll have some kind of prizes or honors at the end of it. So anybody who thinks that'll be fun to do, or just to get experience on the platform and understand how gamification and interactive content can really improve the basic foundational training for people and keep their awareness going. Love to see you in the challenge. One last promotional note is just to say we've teamed up with Conceal. I did a webinar last week with the folks at Conceal. They're an AI-based browser isolation platform, which is really cool because if you set up the policies, basically they will isolate people who are trying to go to the risky sites, whether they're on a block list or they fail some kind of risk score. Then they actually end up, their tab opens up in a virtual machine rather than on your computer. So that's a pretty cool technology. We kind of see a good fit between ClickArmor and them. So we have a great couple of packages for 25 users and 150 users. Love to see you take advantage of that. It's a great discount. Finally, our next session, we're not going to do it every 2 weeks for the summer. At least we'll go to a monthly cadence. So July 10th will be the next one. And, we'll go back to basics for human risk management. People are talking a lot about human risk management and metrics. So I think not just, what are the KPIs everybody should be using? I don't know that there is a standard set that everybody should be using. It might be that each organization has to decide for themselves what are the best metrics, either interim or on the outbound or final assessments. So we're going to talk about that in our next session. So anybody who'd like to join that, this code should get you to the registration page for it, and hopefully we'll see you on the 10th. With that, I want to thank Michaela, Ross, Fleetus. Ryan's been lurking in the background. Thanks, Ryan, for monitoring us. And we hope to see you all again in a month. Thanks very much. Take care.